Don Lewis coming to you from beautiful Florida. And today our question comes to us from Dina Hobbs. And Dina has this question: what defines a vampire? And Dina is asking this question having watched an old video here on Magic TV, one of the interactive Grimoire series, which we did in excess of a decade ago. And one of those interactive grimoires was on the subject of vampirism. So I'm assuming she's asking the question in direct relation to the video, but I'm going to answer it in much more general terms. What defines a vampire? Well, it depends entirely on who you're talking to, because there are many definitions, and this is true of ever so very many words. In terms of the widest common denominator of what people mean when they talk about vampires in contemporary English, it is a person or thing that sucks an important quality from another. That can be someone who is sucking blood like a mythological vampire. It can be someone who is emotionally draining. It can be someone who is psychically draining. It can be someone who's financially draining. It can be somebody who takes a lot of time. And it doesn't even necessarily have to be a person for the word to be used in relationship to it. And then obviously there's a whole range of biological meanings for this, for things such as vampire bats. So I would say that not even blood drinking is a definitive aspect of this term in contemporary English. And I will add that about a century ago, the term vampire was often used in the sense of a femme fatale, a very seductive but dangerous woman who was very much a trope of the literature and films of the time. And for a while, that was a very popular use of the term. You don't really hear it now, but it certainly must add into the conversation. And what we come down to is that the word is used in many different ways. For some people, it is a self-descriptor. There's a whole vampire community out there. And they're divided between those who actually do drink blood, who are called sanguine vampires, and a whole other set who are non-sanguine and who work with energy. But this is a subculture full of real people, for better or worse, and not necessarily what you would expect them to be from ideas you might have from movies. There is also the whole realm of mythological vampires, which is not as coherent as you might expect it to be, and many different things have been put under that heading, which may or may not properly belong there. But with a word so widely used in so many different ways, it's very hard to say what does properly belong there. It's kind of like the word witch. A lot of things are described using the word witch, which are mutually exclusive to one another. But in the English language, that's what people do, and some people describe themselves as witches and mean something very different from what someone else might mean who is using that word, and it's the same for vampire. In mythology and literature, vampires generally drink blood, sometimes subsist off the energy of others, sometimes they are the, quote, undead, unquote, and sometimes they're not. In subcultures, they're real living people who sometimes identify strongly with that mythology, sometimes are more about energy. And Michelle Belanger, who is a prominent writer on the subject, explained to me that in her view, being a psychic vampire was a matter of having less yang energy than most people, and therefore being able to readily absorb it from other people, which she felt was a valuable technique of healing, which I have to agree, that makes perfect sense. And that one could learn how to use it in that way once they became aware that they had that imbalance. And again, in daily conversation, vampire can mean so many things to so many people, and why, you might ask, did I choose to answer this particular question? And it's not just for the meaning of the word vampire, but as I've pointed out using the word witch, and could also point out using the word pagan, and any number of other words, very often words have very different meanings to different people who are using them, and this is an important thing to remember. And it's important if you're going to have conversations about these things, for example, sometimes you may have to pay attention to how that other person is using the word and vary your own usage accordingly if you want them to understand what you're saying. Or, for that matter, for you to understand what they're saying. So, It's a matter of understanding that words are very variable. And I've heard people say, words have power, their innate meaning, blah, blah, blah. Words generally don't have innate meanings, and if you follow their history, they change drastically and sometimes very quickly. So I would say be very careful how much power you place in a word, because it could have a different meaning just a few years from now. A perfect example of that is the word cult. Virtually anyone watching this video will recognize that word as a dangerous religious or political movement, which generally is associated with things like brainwashing. But when I was a child, that's not at all what this word meant. It would be closer to say that it represented a limited branch within a larger religious movement, such as the cult of the Virgin Mary. When people in, say, the 1960s spoke of the cult of the Virgin Mary, it was not meant in any kind of pejorative sense. Or if they were talking about ancient religion, it might be the cult of Isis or the cult of Apollo, etc., and it referred to a particular strain within a larger religion. In the 70s, this changed, and that word took on an entirely different meaning, and it's very important to take note of that meaning, because if you use it in the old sense, you will be misunderstood. This is true of words in general, and you have to keep an elastic mindset regarding how words change. So I think my message today is to remember that words have different meanings to different people, and one word can have drastically different understandings in different circumstances and different subcultures. And if you're going to be using that word, you need to be aware of it. And in terms of defining yourself, when choosing words, you need to remember that not everyone is using them the same way. And be prepared to clarify if need be, and don't be surprised if sometimes people have a drastically different understanding, because it's just the nature of language. So those would be my thoughts. I hope you find them helpful, and until next time, may you blessed be. Please join me for our Correllian Peace Prayer. I pray for peace. I pray for love. I pray for stability. I pray for the nation where I live. I pray for the world.